Hey everybody, my name is Matt McLaughlin, and this is Where Did That Come From? How does student beliefs impact their behavior? So where we're going to go with this is looking at these ideas of student belief and the greater ideas of how behavior is impacted in that students have certain beliefs or don't have certain beliefs. So we're going to look at this from an equity lens, and we're going to be looking at the equity compass to identify where teachers and students are located and how we deal with the situations in those cases. We're going to look at how identity and student norms are impacted as well. We are going to look at methods to stop or harness disruptive behavior in the classroom. So when we begin this, I like to question, where are people on their scale right now? When we think about professional development, there tends to be a scale of how people live in professional development, and where we are when we start our professional development is very important. So this is the Courageous Conversation Compass. This compass really takes in the question of where are you at currently. So when we think about this, this is through the work of Glenn Singleton in Courageous Conversations About Race. I'm going to start in the upper left-hand quadrant as you see it on my screen. That is the believing or soul area. It's a moral piece. So when we think in a moral or a believing or a soulful way, what are our base beliefs? I can say that all people are created equal. That is a moral belief that I have, that no one should be treated differently than anyone else. That is a moral belief. So when I walk into some situations, morally, I may react to them. And that's where I live on the compass when I'm reacting to those areas. Intellectually, on the other side, is my thinking piece. I can think about a whole lot. This is where my cognitive dissonance comes in. This is where my intellectual brain lives, where I look at the history of different situations and I really start thinking about all the different aspects of it. So I may live in the intellectual piece in some situations where I go to thinking before I go to my morals or I go to emotional, relational. Going diagonal, we're going to look at the emotional section. This is where it all comes from feelings. There are times when we react because we feel things. When you see a child crying or a parent hurt, when you see things that make you react immediately, and Christmas, the half of the commercials looking for donations are all about getting a emotional end of things. They're not applying to your intellectual. They're playing in the arms of an angel and showing you puppies in cages. So they're really going for that emotional response, and that's where they want you to be. The last quadrant is relational. Relational is when you see yourself in the situation. One of the classic examples I give for this, or for myself at least, is I was bullied as a child. So when I see bullying in schools, I will end up in a relational situation before I'm in the intellectual or the emotional or moral. I relate to the student that's getting bullied and I react based on those things. And we really need to think about where we are when we deal with different activities. Because when we are teaching and when we are working with students, we are on the compass and they are on the compass. And where I am on the compass and where they are in the compass may be at odds with each other, and I may be giving an intellectual response when the kid is in the emotional level and cannot see the intellectual. So we really need to get ourselves more centered where we are in multiple zones where we can talk about things. When we talk behavior and race and equity, we have to think about some agreements that we make right off the bat. And in having these discussions, the first thing we always ask is that everyone stay engaged. While we want to acknowledge each other's humanity and that there are moments that we need to step away, we can step away, but we should come back to the work. We need to stay engaged in this work, and we need to stay engaged in understanding each other. And when we work towards understanding each other, there are going to be periods of discomfort. No matter what we do, people are not always going to be comfortable with what we say or what we do. We have to recognize and experience that discomfort so that we can move beyond it. Speaking your truth is another key piece, is that I need to speak for me. I am a white male. I am who I am. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I speak from that lens. I don't get to speak for a woman. I don't get to speak for a black male. I don't get to speak for other white males. I have to speak for me and only me. And the other thing is to accept non-closure. There are going to be times when we don't get what we want and we don't get answers, and that's okay. We won't always get answers, and in many times we won't get answers. So we have to really consider what answers we have and where we're going with them. When we talk race, we use the conditions. When I talk behavior, I use the conditions. I may adjust them for it, but I use them. First thing is to focus on personal, local, and immediate. I want what we are dealing with now is what we are talking about. I'm not talking about with what happened 5 years ago. I'm not talking about with what happened yesterday. I want to talk about what is going on now. What is here in the room, and why are we talking now? We also need to isolate race or isolate situational. So we want to think about what is the role of race in what we're doing. What is the role of the topic? We need to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what the social construction is and what are multiple perspectives into it. What is the student's perspective? What is the teacher's perspective? What is the administration's perspective? What is the society's perspective? And we need to recognize that there are multiple perspectives that make up any construction. We want to monitor agreements, conditions, and establish parameters. We are constantly thinking about, are we having a conversation that uses these agreements? Are we creating a condition where we can have this conversation? When we say a working definition for race, whatever conversation we're having, we want to make sure that everyone has the same definitions. Because if we don't have the same definition, we won't be talking about the same thing. And we need to examine the presence and role of whiteness. In this case, I might say of power, or I might say, and we can look at this from multiple situations.
I always felt like I was alone in school. Like I never felt like I had a place or like that I fit in or that I was.
I'm going to ask you to watch this video, and I want you to think about what it says about the bias and the situation the student was in.
I always felt like I was alone in school. Like I never felt like I had a place or like that I fit in or that I was accepted or wanted there. I didn't try as hard for school. I would come home and not really feel like doing homework, or I'd procrastinate really bad because I just didn't really have the motivation. And like up until this year, until I built my own self-confidence, my school desire to go and do good was not nearly as high as now. Implicit bias is something that I see every day, but also that I see being created every day. The little things in the very beginning that implicit bias cause make for such drastic effects in that kid's life down the road. My brother has chronic migraines, so he missed a lot of school growing up. And we turned in the notes to the school. His doctor verified that he had chronic migraines. With that, basically anytime that you have an absence, they're supposed to ease off on you about it. And his school social worker was just on us all the time. She was calling us multiple times a week, and it was like we could never really get a break, even though he had a legitimate issue. And it was only black kids that she was doing this to. It wasn't white kids who had any absence problems. There was none that she had on her list that were white kids that she was going for. It was only black kids. And he never really got a break from it. It didn't end until we moved away. You could see on him that it ruined his care for school, and he didn't want to deal with it. It wasn't school anymore for him. It was a burden. His story is just one in a million of what's going on, and it may not be with absences, but I feel like a lot of kids of color are being targeted and it's destroying their motivation for school and destroying their care when that's going to destroy like their future because they're going to lose it at such an early point. Chronic absenteeism and ISS and OSS, but it's like a kid doesn't care, he's going to start acting out. And he starts acting out, he's going to get pinpointed even more. People just not really realizing that they're being discriminatory is the biggest issue. For me, I'll go to school and I'll be in a classroom setting and it's like a white kid will be yelling out and they'll get a warning. But a black kid does it and they're sitting out of the classroom and they get in trouble and then they end up with ISS or lunch detention or OSS. And then I think that goes into, that plays into when it comes to like suspension or more suspensions or when it comes to dropouts. Because it's like you get suspended all the time for the same things that other people are doing, but you're the one getting in trouble for it. You don't care that much. I'm being targeted the moment I walk in the room. Like, I'm at a disadvantage just for being myself. I had a teacher who was homophobic and racist last year. She would just like be more hostile towards me. She wouldn't respond to me as often. In the classroom as a whole, she would respond to all the white kids before she would answer any of the black kids. And I'm not that good at math, so that's a class where I need a lot of help in. But when you don't have a teacher that you feel like cares and accepts you, then it makes it a lot harder to actually get the help that you need, because it's like, why am I gonna go to you if it feels like you don't even want me in your presence? Like, it feels like I'm not good enough to be around you. She probably didn't even think it out, like, oh, I'm gonna pick the white kids first. Like, I don't think that was ever a thought that went through her mind. That's how she was raised and that's where she came from and that's what she's always known. And nobody should think that they don't have implicit biases, as we all do. Like, it's about how we live in a society where you're taught to believe certain things and to believe certain things about different people. And whenever you see them, that's what comes to mind. Every single person has those, and every single person has to take their own time to work on it. Like, it's not about one minority, it's about where they all meet. Where like I haven't faced stuff for being black, it's been equaled out, I guess you could say, by being gay. Because being gay is definitely like pounded onto or added onto it in a lot of ways. And for me, it's like I walk in the bathroom and boys see me and they're like, oh, I don't want to be in the bathroom with a gay kid, they walk out. Or it's like they walk in the bathroom and it's, oh, are you a girl? Spreading who people are on the inside is what you have to do to get people to understand. In order to promote excellence and to prepare kids for the real world, like our teachers are always telling us, you have to teach kids to be accepting of everything they're going to see. Because at the end of the day, like, a kid is not going to go into the real world and they're not going to go and travel and do their careers and never meet anybody who looks different than them. Like, that's not how the world works. They're going to meet people who are different in race, sexuality, religion, every area. The biggest solution is definitely exposure, because it's like, you can never really get people, like, you can't force people to change their minds, but you can show them why they should. I feel like that's like the biggest picture is we're all people, and that's what people have to understand, is that everybody deserves their own chances in life.
So what about this and this person's story? Where are you in the compass? What do you recognize about it? Are you in the intellectual? Are you thinking about what he's saying and how what he's saying is true or false, or where things are? Is it relational? Do you recognize his story within yourself and who you are? Is it emotional? Are you upset, or are you reacting out of the hurt that he feels? Are you being empathetic? Or is it moral, that you think that he shouldn't have had these situations and that morally it was incorrect? When we think about behavior, we have to consider where people are coming from and what's going on. So the four functions of behavior normally are sensory, escapism, attention, or something tangible, that a student will act out because of one of these things. And when we don't have good relationships with students, or they see bias or any of those keys, we will sometimes see that they're acting out to escape. They do not want to be in the situation because they are making the choice because the situation is either hard or boring, and that we have to do something then to get them to do it. So we use different tactics, like giving them prompts or altering length of tasks. Are is what's going on because they want attention. And if they want attention, is it a positive reinforcement piece? But the other thing we need to consider is, where are the students on the campus when they're acting out? Are they going for a function of behavior? And if it's a sensory function, are they acting out because of something going on in the classroom? Is it the escape? Is that something going on they need to remove themselves from? So when we think about classroom management and cultural relevancy, New York University says that the first thing we need to do is recognize ourselves. We need to look at our culture and our biases and really understand the bias and the culture that we have. Then we also have to look at the students' cultural backgrounds. We need to know our students. And we need to know them to such an extent that we get where they are coming from. And when I say cultural backgrounds, I'm not talking just your Black students, your white students, your Hispanic students, because you could be someone from Peru and you have a very different culture than someone from Guatemala, or you may have a different culture than someone from Mexico. And when we talk culture, even amongst white students, there are different cultures. When I worked down on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, you had the waterman culture, you had a farming culture, and you had a chicken farming culture. And each of those groups had a different cultural background based on what they did. So when we talk inner city, it may be a couple block radius for cultural background. We need to think about what is their cultural background. And then we also need to look at the broader, there's a broader social, economic, or political context that their culture fits in. And how much of what we do is based on the appropriate management strategy, and how much do we have a commitment in building these classrooms? Because when you're building the culturally relevant classroom, it takes time. And it is something that you need to do every single day. It's something that you need to work through. You can't just go, boom, it happens. It's a longer process. And also remember that some students are coming in after having a bad day.
Where is the moment we need it the most? You kick up the leaves and the magic is lost. Tell me your blue skies fade to gray. Tell me your passion's gone away. And I don't need no carrying on. You stand in the line just to hit a new low. You're faking a smile with the coffee to go. Tell me your life's been way offline. You fall into pieces every time. And I don't need no carrying on. 'Cause you had a bad day. You're taking one down. You sing a sad song just to turn it around. You say you don't know. You tell me don't lie. You're working a smile and you go for a ride. You had a bad day. The camera don't lie. You're coming back down and you really don't mind. You had a bad day. You had a bad day.
That sometimes students just have a bad day, and that we need to react in such a way that students don't continue having a bad day that day. That we have to have grace for our students and for ourselves as we go through this work and we build culturally relevant classrooms and culturally relevant pieces. And the key there is the relationship. Because for us to be truly culturally relevant, we need to have relationships with all of our students. Not just the ones we like, not the ones that it's easiest for, but all of our students, and that we work with those relationships and build those relationships with them. We find the things that we have in common and we find the things we don't, and we have conversations. Because the best idea of where you get culture from is from the students themselves. They will tell you what their culture is. So when I deal with students, or when you deal with students, the first thing you should think about when a kid is acting out is, where am I currently? What position am I in? Am I having a bad day? Am I making this worse? Where am I on my compass that tells me how I'm, like, where I'm reacting? Where is the student coming from? Because I need to make sure that the way I speak to them is in such a way that they'll understand it. And they may be so far and emotional, like most teenagers when they're acting out, or they may be an intellectual, or they may be immoral, that if I'm in relational and I'm reacting, that's not going to be good. What do I need to get across? Have I been clear about expectations? What is the cultural element of what I'm about to do? And what is the purpose of their behavior? I can't address their behavior until I understand what the purpose is. When I think culturally, what are the cultural norms of the students? When we talk about cultural and cultural norms, one of the things that we have to say is, some students, when they're getting yelled at, aren't going to look you in the eyes. That is a white cultural thing. That is a cultural piece to that. And that may impact how you react to them. They may act certain ways that are different because of their cultural norms. And we need to be aware of their cultural norms. I'm not saying we need to accept it and just follow their cultural norms. I'm saying we need to be aware of it, because we have to make sure that the cultural norm that we are discussing makes sense. And why is what they're doing what they're doing? What is the impact on their behavior? Do we have to reteach cultural norms of the school and incorporate the school norms into their cultural norms? Do we have to possibly reteach? Do we have to go through? I'm not saying that we have to accept the norms and the culture that they're coming from, but we need to honor it. Also, remember, what we know of culture may be very different than what it actually is. As we were brought up, we gained a lot of information, especially in my upbringing. It was made very clear to me about what manners and courtesy are, what friendship is, what leadership is, what beauty is. We have a much deeper culture that, yes, Cinco de Mayo is the 5th of May. That is a holiday. We can look around and we can talk about fashion and language and literature, but that doesn't tell you about the ideas of eye contact or personal space. What certain gender gestures mean, how people deal with different genders. What is fairness and justice? What is time? All of these pieces are that below the surface information, the deeper culture that we need to keep in mind. So as you work through cultural irrelevancy and you really start thinking about how to manage things, give yourself grace and assume good intentions. Really think about that you are trying to do your best and that it's a process, that not everyone gets to the end at the same time, and that we will sometimes step back and go back forward. Thank you so much for watching this. I do appreciate every chance. If you have any questions, you can email me at mpmclaughlin@iu12.org. I hope you have a wonderful day.